Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. Have you ever looked at a stranger for just a few seconds and somehow felt like you had known them forever? The soft rumble of the downtown subway echoed through the tunnel as another Manhattan train slid into the station with a tired metallic sigh. It was barely 7:30 on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when everyone stared at their phones, clutched oversized coffee cups, and silently counted the stops until work. Elise Rowan stepped inside just before the doors closed, hugging a weathered sketchbook against her chest. The edges were bent from years of use, the cover softened by countless subway rides, coffee shop afternoons, and lonely evenings spent chasing a dream that still felt impossibly far away. She found an empty seat near the center of the car, slipped off one knitted glove, and rested a pencil between her fingers almost without thinking. Drawing strangers had become her morning ritual. Faces told stories that words often hid. Some carried exhaustion. Some carried hope. Others wore expensive clothes, but looked heartbreakingly lonely. Elise never asked permission because she never kept the drawings. Most ended up tucked between old notebook pages, forgotten except for the quiet moments they gave her. Across the aisle, a man stepped onto the train just before the doors closed again. He wore a charcoal wool coat that looked warm but not flashy, dark jeans, and boots that had clearly seen plenty of New York sidewalks. No designer logos. No bodyguards. No expensive watch catching the fluorescent lights. If anyone noticed him, they probably assumed he was another professional heading downtown. He glanced around the crowded car before choosing the seat directly opposite Elise. For a second their eyes met. He offered a polite smile, the kind exchange between strangers who understood the unspoken rules of public transportation. Then he looked out the window as the train disappeared into darkness beneath the city. Elise lowered her eyes. Quickly, embarrassed that she had stared. But something about him lingered in her thoughts. It was not his appearance alone. It was the expression resting quietly behind his eyes, as though he had spent years carrying responsibilities no one else could see. She opened her sketchbook. The first lines appeared almost on their own. A gentle curve for his jaw, the thoughtful angle of his shoulders, the way one hand rested loosely on a leather messenger bag while the other absent-mindedly traced circles against the fabric of his coat. She never drew perfect portraits. She drew feelings. Every few seconds she looked up, pretending to study the subway map whenever he shifted slightly. The train stopped at 14th Street. More passengers climbed aboard, squeezing into every available space. The noise grew louder, but somehow the small space between Elise and the stranger remained strangely quiet. He never noticed the pencil dancing across the paper. Instead, he watched an elderly couple help each other balance as the train lurched forward, a faint smile crossing his face before disappearing almost as quickly as it came. Elise caught that smile. It changed everything about the drawing. Suddenly, the man no longer looked distant. He looked kind, human, approachable. She shaded the corners of his eyes with slow, careful strokes, feeling as though she were preserving a moment that would vanish forever once the train reached its final stop. Several minutes later, the automated voice announced Canal Street. The stranger stood, adjusting the strap over his shoulder. For the briefest moment, he glanced toward Elise again. "Have a good day," he said warmly. His voice was calm, genuine, and unexpectedly familiar, even though they had never spoken before. Elise blinked in surprise. "You too," she answered with an awkward smile. The door slid open. He stepped onto the platform and disappeared into the morning crowd, without ever looking back. The train pulled away. Elise looked down at the sketch resting on her lap. Somehow, without realizing it, she had drawn more than a face. She had drawn a man who seemed quietly invisible inside one of the busiest cities in the world. She smiled. To herself, carefully closed the sketchbook, and slipped it into her canvas bag. She had no idea that somewhere above the streets of Manhattan, someone had already seen that drawing. And before another sunrise arrived, the entire city would see it too. Elise barely thought about the sketch again as the rest of the day swept her into its familiar rhythm. She spent the morning serving coffee at a small cafe in Soho to cover rent, while squeezing freelance illustration work into every spare minute. Between customers, she answered emails that almost always began with the same polite rejection. "Thank you for your submission. Unfortunately, We have decided to move forward with another artist." She smiled anyway, tucked her phone into her apron, and reminded herself that every successful illustrator had heard the word no more times than anyone could count. After her shift ended, she stopped at a tiny public park a few blocks away, her favorite place to draw before heading home. Children laughed near the fountain, office workers hurried past with briefcases, and street musicians filled the air with soft jazz that drifted between the trees. Elise opened her sketchbook again, pausing when she reached the portrait from the subway. Somehow it still held her attention. The stranger's quiet smile seemed warmer in the afternoon sunlight, almost as though the page had remembered something she had not. She traced one finger lightly along the edge of the paper before taking a quick picture with her phone. She rarely shared her artwork online, but something about this drawing felt different. Without overthinking it, she uploaded the image to her small social media page with a simple caption. Some faces carry stories even before they speak. She slipped her phone back into her bag and thought nothing more of it. Across the city, several floors above Midtown, Declan Road stood inside a sleek conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Executives discussed quarterly projections while colorful charts covered an enormous digital screen. Numbers climbed. Markets expanded. Investors smiled. Yet Declan found himself staring through the glass instead of at the presentation. Success had become strangely predictable. Every meeting sounded like the one before it. Every congratulation felt identical. When the meeting finally ended, his assistant walked beside him through the hallway. "Your interview with Business Vision magazine is tomorrow morning," she reminded him. "The Times Square campaign is ready for approval whenever you are." Declan nodded absent-mindedly. His company had purchased the largest digital billboard in Times Square to launch a global creativity initiative designed to support young artists. Marketing teams had spent months preparing polished advertisements featuring celebrities, expensive graphics, and carefully tested slogans. None of them felt real. Later that evening, while scrolling through design submissions at home, Declan stopped unexpectedly. There it was. His own face stared back at him, drawn only with graphite. No dramatic lighting. No expensive suit. No polished executive smile. Just a tired man looking out a subway window, as if searching for something he had forgotten. He leaned closer to the screen. The artist's name appeared beneath the post. Elise Rowan. Fewer than 300 followers. Almost no comments. Yet the portrait carried more honesty than every professionally commissioned photograph he had ever approved. For several long seconds, he simply stared. "She saw me," he whispered quietly to himself. Not the billionaire whose face appeared in financial magazines. Not the technology founder celebrated at conferences. Somehow, a complete stranger had noticed the person hidden underneath all of it. The next morning, Elise left her apartment carrying the same canvas bag and the same worn sketchbook, unaware that thousands of people had already begun gathering beneath the giant digital screens in Times Square. Delivery trucks rolled through early traffic. Tourists lifted cameras toward the towering buildings. Office workers hurried across crosswalks with coffee in hand. At precisely 8 o'clock, every scheduled advertisement suddenly disappeared from one massive billboard. Conversations stopped. Heads tilted upward. Instead of a luxury brand or a movie trailer, a simple black and white sketch slowly faded into view. The portrait stretched nearly 100 feet across the glowing screen. Beneath it appeared only a single sentence written in elegant white letters. "Sometimes the world sees your heart before your name." Elise stepped out of the subway station just 3 blocks away, hearing people gasp before she understood why. She looked up, froze in the middle of the sidewalk, and felt the world around her disappear. Her drawing filled the morning sky above Manhattan. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught. She had never sent the sketch to anyone. She had never entered a contest. She had never spoken to a gallery, an agency, or a company. Yet somehow the quiet stranger she had drawn less than 24 hours earlier was now watching over Times Square from the largest digital canvas she had ever imagined, and she had absolutely no idea who had made it happen. Elise stood motionless on the crowded sidewalk long after everyone else had taken their pictures and continued walking. The morning air felt colder than it had only minutes earlier. People around her pointed toward the towering screen, wondering aloud who the mysterious artist was and why such a simple drawing had replaced a multi-million-dollar advertisement. Some guessed it was part of an elaborate marketing campaign. Others believed it was promoting a movie or a luxury fashion brand. Elise knew only one thing. She had never given anyone permission to use her work. Her phone began vibrating almost nonstop. Notifications flooded her screen faster than she could read them. Hundreds became thousands. Her tiny social media page, once visited by only a handful of friends and fellow artists, suddenly overflowed with messages from strangers across the country. Galleries asked for interviews. Journalists requested comments. Art bloggers reposted her sketch with captions celebrating the anonymous illustrator who had captivated New York overnight. Elise felt her heart race. She was not excited. She was overwhelmed. She had spent years hoping someone would notice her work, but never like this. She quietly stepped away from the growing crowd and ducked into a nearby coffee shop, hoping to catch her breath. Sitting by the window, she stared once more at the portrait on her phone. Nothing about it seemed extraordinary to her. It was simply one quiet moment between two strangers on an ordinary subway ride. Meanwhile, several miles away, Declan Rhodes stood inside his office overlooking Midtown as the same portrait filled another screen mounted across the conference room wall. His marketing executives applauded the campaign's immediate success. Social media engagement had shattered expectations within the first hour. Television stations had already begun discussing the unexpected artwork dominating Times Square. Yet Declan barely listened. His attention remained fixed on the eyes in the drawing. They looked calmer than the man he saw in the mirror every morning. His assistant entered carrying a tablet. "We have identified the artist," she said gently. "Her name is Elise Rowan, 25 years old, freelance illustrator. She works mornings at a neighborhood cafe and takes small commission projects at night." Declan accepted the tablet, but hardly glanced at the information. He was not interested in statistics or background reports. "Do not contact her through the company," he said after a thoughtful silence. His assistant looked surprised. "You do not want to invite her to the campaign launch?" Declan slowly shook his head. "If a corporate email arrives today, she will assume this was all another publicity stunt. I want her to know the drawing mattered before she ever knows who I am." His assistant smiled slightly. She had worked beside Declan for nearly 8 years and had rarely heard him speak with such quiet sincerity. "Then what would you like us to do?" she asked. Declan looked once more at the portrait before answering. "Find out where she exhibits her work. Not where the internet says she should be. Where she actually spends her time." Back in Soho, Elise finished her untouched cup of coffee and hurried toward the small community art center where she rented a shared studio twice a week. She hoped the familiar smell of paint and paper would calm her thoughts. Instead, she found several local artists already gathered around the entrance, talking excitedly. The moment she stepped inside, every conversation stopped. A gray-haired instructor walked over with a broad smile. "Elise," he said warmly, "I knew that drawing looked like your style." She blinked in confusion. "You knew?" He laughed softly. "Every artist leaves fingerprints that are not made with ink. Yours has always been kindness." His words lingered with her long after the others returned to their easels. She sat quietly at her small wooden desk, opened her sketchbook, and stared at the empty page waiting beneath her pencil. For the first time in years, she could not bring herself to draw. Her thoughts kept returning to the stranger on the subway. Who was he? Why had someone chosen that particular portrait? And why did she feel as though the story behind his gentle smile had only just begun? At that very moment, less than 5 miles away, Declan slipped on the same charcoal coat he had worn the morning they first met. Ignoring the waiting chauffeur outside headquarters, he chose to walk alone through the city, carrying only one destination in mind. Somewhere in New York was the woman who had seen the person he had almost forgotten how to be, and for the first time in many years, finding someone mattered more to him than closing the next billion-dollar deal. The following afternoon, the city finally seemed to slow down. A light breeze drifted through the streets as sunshine spilled across the sidewalks, softening the sharp edges of Manhattan. Elise decided to spend her only free hour at the Riverside Community Art Center, a renovated brick warehouse where local painters, sculptors, and illustrators displayed their work without expensive admission tickets or celebrity sponsors. It had always been her favorite place because nobody cared how many followers you had or how much money you earned. People simply came because they loved art. She carried her sketchbook beneath one arm and quietly wandered through the galleries, stopping every few feet to admire watercolor landscapes and charcoal portraits created by artists who still believed beauty deserved a place in ordinary life. For the first time since the mysterious billboard appeared, her breathing began to steady. Here, surrounded by unfinished dreams hanging proudly on white walls, she felt like herself again. At nearly the same moment, Declan Rhodes stepped through the center's front entrance wearing the same charcoal coat and carrying nothing that hinted at the fortune attached to his name. No assistants followed him. No security team cleared a path. He purchased a simple admission ticket from the volunteer at the front desk, thanked her with a warm smile, and blended naturally into the afternoon crowd. He had visited museums around the world, but this small community gallery somehow felt more honest than rooms filled with priceless masterpieces. As he moved quietly from one exhibit to another, his eyes searched without urgency until they finally found her standing in front of a collection of student sketches. She looked exactly as he remembered. Her hair was loosely tied back, a pencil rested behind one ear, and she studied every drawing with genuine curiosity rather than comparison. He hesitated for a moment, wondering whether he should simply leave and preserve the memory of the subway. Instead, he walked forward. Elise sensed someone stopping beside her before she looked up. The moment their eyes met, recognition flashed across both faces. She blinked twice, almost convinced she had imagined him. Then an embarrassed laugh escaped before she could stop it. "You are the man from the subway," she said. Declan smiled gently. "And you are the artist who secretly turned me into someone worth looking at." Heat rushed to Elise's cheeks. "I am so sorry. I never meant for anyone else to see that drawing." "I am glad they did," he answered quietly, "although I still have absolutely no idea how it ended up in Times Square." She searched his expression for any sign that he was joking or hiding something, but found only quiet sincerity. "Neither do I," she admitted. "It has been the strangest 2 days of my life." They stood in comfortable silence for a few seconds before Declan nodded toward another gallery room. "Would you mind walking with me?" She hesitated only briefly before agreeing. They wandered slowly through the exhibits, talking about paintings instead of themselves. Elise spoke enthusiastically about composition, shadows, and the emotion hidden inside ordinary faces. Declan listened far more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions that surprised her. He did not pretend to understand every artistic technique, but he genuinely wanted to learn why certain drawings made people stop and feel something. Eventually, they found themselves sitting on a wooden bench overlooking a wall filled with pencil portraits created by local high school graduates. Elise smiled softly. "People always ask why I draw strangers," she said. "I think it is because strangers never try to become someone else while they are riding the subway. For a few minutes, they forget they are being watched." Declan looked thoughtfully at one of the portraits before answering. "Maybe that is why I liked your drawing. It reminded me of someone I had not seen in a very long time." Elise turned toward him. "Who?" He smiled, although there was unmistakable sadness behind it. "Myself." She studied his face carefully. There was no arrogance in his voice, no attempt to impress her, only honesty wrapped in quiet restraint. It made her wonder what kind of life this mysterious man actually lived. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the gallery floor, they continued talking about favorite artists, neighborhood coffee shops, old sketchbooks, and childhood dreams. Neither noticed how easily the hours slipped away. When the announcement came that the center would soon close for the evening, they walked together toward the exit. Outside, the city glowed with the warm colors of early sunset. Declan glanced toward the small cafe across the street before looking back at Elise. "Would you let me buy you a cup of coffee?" he asked. "Not because of the drawing, just because I think conversations like this deserve another hour." Elise looked at him for a long moment before smiling. "I think they do too." Side by side, they crossed the street, both believing they had simply met a kind stranger for the second time, completely unaware that the biggest secret between them had not yet been spoken. Coffee turned into a quiet tradition neither of them planned. Over the next 2 weeks, whenever their schedules allowed, Elise and Declan somehow ended up sharing another table somewhere in the city. Sometimes it was a tiny cafe tucked beneath an old brownstone. Sometimes it was a food truck beside the Hudson River where they carried paper cups to a nearby bench. Once they even spent an hour walking through a weekend street market, laughing over hand-painted postcards and listening to an elderly violinist perform for passing strangers. The conversations never felt forced. Elise spoke about growing up in a modest apartment in Queens with parents who believed that kindness mattered more than money. She admitted that becoming an illustrator had never been the practical choice, but every time she tried imagining another career, she felt as though she would be abandoning a piece of herself. Declan listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that made her realize he cared more about her answers than about filling the silence. When she asked about his own work, he smiled the same careful smile every time. "I help build technology for creative businesses," he would say. It was true, but it was far from the whole truth. Elise accepted the answer without pressing further. She had met enough people in New York to understand that everyone carried stories they were not yet ready to tell. One cool Saturday afternoon, they wandered through Central Park carrying hot chocolate as musicians played beneath the trees. Elise stopped beside a man painting watercolor skylines for tourists. She watched him quietly before saying, "I think people misunderstand artists." Declan looked toward her. "How?" She smiled thoughtfully. "Most people think we are trying to draw beautiful things. We are actually trying to remember beautiful moments before they disappear." Declan remained silent for several seconds. Her words settled somewhere deep inside him. He realized that almost every important memory in his own life had been replaced by meetings, schedules, and achievements that looked impressive on paper but felt strangely empty when he remembered them. That evening, after dropping Elise near her apartment building, Declan returned to headquarters instead of going home. Nearly every office light had already been turned off, leaving the executive floor unusually quiet. He entered a conference room where his foundation director was reviewing proposals for the company's annual arts initiative. "How many community grants are still available?" Declan asked. She looked up in surprise. 24. What? He picked up one application from the stack before placing it back down. "I want to expand the program." Quietly. She raised an eyebrow. Quietly. Declan nodded. "No press release. No interviews. No company logo on the acceptance letters." "Who are we helping?" she asked. Declan looked out toward the city lights sparkling beyond the glass walls. "Artists who are talented enough to keep going even when nobody is watching." The director smiled. "That sounds unusually personal." Declan answered with a faint laugh. "Maybe it is." Within days, additional scholarships, shared studio spaces, and neighborhood exhibition opportunities quietly appeared through local nonprofit organizations across New York. None of the recipients knew where the funding had originated. Elise certainly did not. She simply received an email informing her that the Riverside Community Arts Center had unexpectedly expanded its residency program, and that her application, which had been placed on a waiting list months earlier, had been accepted. She read the message twice before smiling in disbelief. "This cannot be real," she whispered. That evening she met Declan for dinner at a small family-owned Italian restaurant. She could hardly contain her excitement. "Something wonderful happened today," she said as soon as they sat down. "I finally received a studio residency." Declan's eyes brightened with genuine happiness. "Congratulations. I knew someone would recognize your talent." Elise laughed softly. "It feels like my life suddenly changed overnight." Declan lifted his coffee cup with a warm smile. Maybe life was simply waiting for the right moment. She looked at him curiously. "You always say things like you already know how the story ends." He hesitated before answering. "No. I just think the best chapters usually begin when people stop trying to prove their worth." Elise smiled without realizing how deeply those words settled inside her heart. Neither of them noticed that their conversations had already become the favorite part of each other's week. Neither realized that trust was quietly growing between them with every shared coffee, every slow walk, and every ordinary afternoon. And while Elise believed she had simply found a thoughtful man who appreciated art, Declan carried an increasingly difficult secret each time they met, knowing that the longer he waited to reveal who he truly was, the more painful that truth might eventually become. Nearly a month passed before the moment neither of them expected finally arrived. Elise's new residency at the Riverside Community Arts Center was flourishing. She spent long evenings surrounded by unfinished canvases, graphite sketches, and artists who challenged one another to create something honest instead of something fashionable. One afternoon, the center's director hurried into the studio holding a gold envelope with an expression of disbelief. "Elise," he called, "you have been invited to the New York Creative Futures Gala." She looked up from her easel. "Me?" He handed her the invitation. Your subway portrait has become one of the most discussed works of the year. They are honoring emerging artists tonight. Elise carefully opened the envelope, reading the elegant lettering twice. She had heard of the gala before. It was one of the city's most prestigious charity events, bringing together artists, collectors, business leaders, and philanthropists to support creative education across New York. She had never imagined she would receive an invitation. That evening, she stood in front of the small mirror inside her apartment wearing the only formal dress she owned, a simple navy blue gown she had purchased secondhand several years earlier. She adjusted a loose strand of hair, slipped her worn sketchbook into her canvas bag out of habit, then laughed softly at herself before replacing it with a small evening clutch. "You belong there," she whispered, repeating the encouragement she had given herself so many times before difficult moments. Across the city, inside one of Manhattan's grandest ballrooms, final preparations were already underway. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors while guests slowly filled the elegant room. A string quartet played softly near the stage as photographers welcomed famous actors, celebrated architects, museum directors, and influential entrepreneurs. Behind the curtain, Declan adjusted the cuffs of a tailored black tuxedo while reviewing his remarks for the evening. His assistant entered quietly. "Everything is ready, Mr. Rhodes. The board members have arrived." Declan nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "Has Elise checked in?" His assistant smiled knowingly. "She arrived 10 minutes ago. She has no idea you are here." Declan looked toward the stage, uncertainty crossing his face for perhaps the first time in years. "After tonight," he said quietly, "she may never want to see me again." His assistant answered gently, "Or she may finally understand why you wanted her to know you before your name." Out in the ballroom, Elise wandered carefully between elegant displays of artwork and conversations filled with unfamiliar names. She admired paintings more than people, quietly reading the stories beside each exhibit. Several guests recognized her from interviews and congratulated her on the famous subway portrait, leaving her both grateful and slightly embarrassed. As dinner concluded, the lights slowly dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage while the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for supporting another remarkable year of creativity and opportunity. None of this would be possible without the vision of one extraordinary individual whose generosity has transformed thousands of young artists' lives." Applause echoed across the ballroom. Elise smiled politely, expecting another well-known philanthropist she had never heard of. The host continued, "Please join me in welcoming the founder of Rhodes Innovations, chairman of the Rhodes Creative Foundation, and tonight's guest of honor, Mr. Declan Rhodes." Time seemed to stop. Elise stared toward the stage as a familiar figure stepped into the light wearing the same gentle smile she had seen across a subway car and over countless cups of coffee. The room erupted into applause, but she heard almost nothing. Massive screens behind him displayed photographs from magazine covers, technology conferences, international charity events, and business awards. Headlines identified him as one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely breathe. Every conversation they had shared replayed inside her mind. Every careful answer about working in technology. Every thoughtful question. Every quiet walk through the city. Suddenly, all the missing pieces fit together with painful clarity. The mysterious billboard. The anonymous arts funding. The opportunities that had appeared without explanation. None of it had been ordinary. It had all begun with the stranger she believed she knew. Declan's eyes swept across the audience as he reached the podium. They found Elise almost instantly. For one brief moment, the confident billionaire disappeared, replaced by the quiet man from the subway whose smile now carried unmistakable regret. Elise looked back at him, her eyes filled not with admiration but with hurt. Without waiting to hear another word, she quietly stood, turned toward the ballroom doors, and walked away while the applause continued behind her, leaving Declan watching the one person whose opinion suddenly mattered more than every standing ovation he had ever received. The cool night air greeted Elise the moment she stepped outside the ballroom. The sounds of applause faded behind the heavy doors, replaced by the distant hum of Manhattan traffic and the quiet rhythm of her own footsteps. She did not cry. She simply kept walking, trying to make sense of everything she had just learned. Every memory she had shared with Declan suddenly felt different. The conversations that had seemed effortless now carried questions she had never thought to ask. Why had he hidden his name? Why had he watched her struggle to understand the mysterious opportunities appearing around her without saying a word? Had every kind gesture been genuine, or had she unknowingly become part of another carefully designed success story? Behind her, the ballroom doors opened. Elise. His voice was calm, but filled with urgency. She stopped without turning around. A few seconds later, Declan stood several feet away, careful not to move any closer than she seemed willing to allow. The city lights reflected across the quiet street between them. I was going to tell you, he said softly. Elise finally faced him. When? She asked. Tomorrow? Next month? Or after I had trusted you enough that it would not matter anymore? Declan lowered his eyes. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, spoken before thousands of investors, and answered impossible questions from reporters around the world. None of those moments had ever left him searching for words the way this one did. I wanted you to know me first, he admitted. Not the headlines. Not the fortune. Just me. Elise shook her head slowly. You had that chance every single day. Her voice never rose, but the disappointment inside it hurt more than anger could have. Every coffee. Every walk. Every conversation. I told you who I was. You decided I was not allowed to know who you were. Declan looked at her with unmistakable regret. I was afraid. She gave a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. Afraid. Afraid that once you knew my name, you would stop looking at me the way you did on the subway. Elise held his gaze for several long seconds before answering. Do you know why I drew you that morning? He slowly shook his head. Because you looked like someone carrying the weight of the world without asking anyone to notice. I did not draw a billionaire. I did not draw a famous entrepreneur. I drew a stranger who looked lonely. Her words settled heavily between them. But loneliness is not an excuse for hiding the truth. Declan wanted to step closer, but he remained where he was. He knew trust could not be repaired by closing physical distance. The foundation grants, Elise continued quietly. The residency, the billboard. Was all of that because you felt sorry for me? His answer came immediately. No. She searched his face. Then why? Because your work reminded me why creativity matters. The residency existed because artists, like you, deserve opportunities. The billboard happened because one honest drawing said more about humanity than every expensive campaign my company had ever created. None of it was charity. It was respect. Elise listened without interrupting, but the ache inside her remained. You should have trusted me enough to let me decide what I believed. She reached into her evening bag and carefully removed the elegant invitation to the gala. Looking at it one last time, she placed it gently into his hand. I cannot keep accepting opportunities while wondering whether people see my work or simply see the woman who accidentally met a billionaire. Declan looked down at the invitation before raising his eyes again. You earned every one of them. Elise offered a sad smile. Maybe, but right now I need to believe that for myself, not because you tell me. She turned and began walking toward the corner. After only a few steps, she paused without looking back. The man I sketched on the subway looked honest. I hope someday the real Declan Rhodes becomes that man again. Then she continued down the quiet sidewalk until the crowd slowly swallowed her into the endless lights of Manhattan. Declan remained standing exactly where she had left him, the invitation still resting in his hand. For the first time in many years, success felt completely meaningless. He finally understood that protecting his identity had also protected his fears, and in doing so, he had risked losing the one person who had cared about him long before she ever knew the name the rest of the world admired. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Elise buried herself in work at the Riverside Community Arts Center, arriving before sunrise and leaving long after the evening lights reflected across the windows. She accepted no interviews, ignored countless emails from reporters, and politely declined every invitation that mentioned the gala. The sketchbook that had once traveled everywhere with her now remained closed on the corner of her studio table. She still drew every day, but her new sketches focused on empty park benches, quiet subway stations, and rain-covered streets. Faces had become too difficult. Across the city, Declan found himself doing something he had not done in years. He canceled meetings that could easily have been delegated. He postponed interviews. He even turned down a prestigious business award because, for the first time in a very long while, He understood that repairing a balance sheet was far easier than repairing broken trust. One afternoon, he entered the headquarters of the Rhodes Creative Foundation carrying Elise's original subway sketch carefully protected inside a simple portfolio case. The foundation director looked up in surprise. "Do you finally want to announce the artist publicly?" she asked. Declan gently shook his head. "No, I want to celebrate the work, not the story surrounding it." He spread the drawing across the conference table. "I want an exhibition." She smiled. "That can be arranged." He looked directly at her. "Not an exhibition about me." His voice remained calm. "An exhibition about seeing people before judging them. No giant company logo. No speeches about my career. No photographs of me. The only name visitors should remember is the artist." The director nodded slowly, realizing this project meant far more than public relations. During the following weeks, a forgotten warehouse in Brooklyn quietly transformed into an elegant gallery space. He quietly borrowed works from private collectors, the Riverside Community Art Center, previous local exhibitions, and carefully archived submissions Elise had shared over the years, ensuring every piece was displayed with full permission and proper credit. Warm lighting replaced cold industrial fixtures. White walls welcomed charcoal portraits, watercolor studies, unfinished notebook pages, and dozens of illustrations that Elise had created over the years. Every piece had been acquired properly through local exhibitions, previous buyers, or temporary loans from community organizations. Nothing was taken without permission. Nothing was hidden. At the entrance, visitors would see only one title displayed in simple black letters. "Faces we never truly see." Beneath it appeared one smaller line. An exhibition celebrating the humanity inside ordinary moments. There was no mention of Declan Rhodes anywhere in the building. Invitations quietly reached artists, teachers, neighborhood volunteers, and students across New York. Elise received one as well. At first, she almost threw it away, assuming it was another event hoping to capitalize on recent publicity. But something about the understated design caught her attention. No luxury branding. No celebrity photographs. No corporate sponsors printed across the front. Curiosity finally persuaded her to attend. The exhibition opened on a cool Friday evening. As Elise stepped inside, she immediately fell silent. Every wall displayed artwork she recognized with startling familiarity. Her early subway sketches, pencil studies completed during lunch breaks, portraits she had nearly discarded because she believed they were not good enough. Even the tiny drawing she had created of an elderly couple sharing one umbrella in Central Park had been framed with extraordinary care. Visitors moved quietly through the gallery, speaking in soft voices about compassion, resilience, hope, and ordinary beauty. They discussed the emotions inside the drawings rather than the identity of the people being portrayed. Elise felt tears gathering in her eyes for reasons she could not fully explain. She wandered deeper into the gallery until she reached the final room. There, standing alone beneath a warm spotlight, was the original subway portrait that had changed everything. Beside it rested her old weathered sketchbook, displayed inside protective glass exactly as she had left it, open to the page where the first pencil lines had begun. A small card beside the display contained only one sentence. Sometimes the greatest masterpieces begin with someone choosing to truly see another human being. Elise stood motionless, her heart quietly overwhelmed. She finally understood. This exhibition was never about proving that Declan could give her opportunities. It was his way of returning something she had almost lost, her confidence in her own gift. And for the first time since walking out of the gala, she realized that the most meaningful apology she had ever received had not arrived through expensive words or grand promises. It had arrived through quiet respect, allowing her art to stand proudly on its own, exactly as she had always dreamed it would. 1 year later, Manhattan welcomed another bright spring morning, but this time the city felt different to Elise. She no longer hurried through each day wondering whether anyone would ever notice her work. Her studio at the Riverside Community Art Center had become a place where young artists gathered to learn, encourage one another, and believe that talent could grow without losing kindness along the way. The exhibition had traveled to several cities across the country, inspiring thousands of visitors, yet every brochure still carried only the names of the artists. Declan had quietly kept his promise. He never stepped in front of the story. Instead, he stood behind it, making sure creativity always remained the center of attention. Their friendship had returned slowly, not through dramatic conversations, but through honest ones. Trust had not been rebuilt in a single evening. It had grown one truthful answer at a time. Declan no longer avoided difficult questions, and Elise no longer wondered whether every thoughtful gesture carried a hidden purpose. They had learned something far more valuable than romance. They had learned that honesty was the only foundation strong enough to support love. On a crisp Saturday morning, Declan invited Elise to meet him near Times Square. "I have something I would like you to see," he said with the same gentle smile she remembered from the subway, although this time there were no secrets hiding behind it. As they walked through the busy streets, tourists snapped photographs, musicians filled the sidewalks with music, and the familiar energy of New York surrounded them. Elise laughed as they reached the intersection where everything had unexpectedly begun a year earlier. "You know," she said, looking around, "I still cannot believe my sketch ever appeared here." Declan smiled without answering. Instead, he glanced toward the towering digital billboards above them. Suddenly, the advertisements faded away. One by one, the enormous screens turned black before a familiar pencil drawing slowly appeared. It was not the portrait of Declan that had once astonished the city. It was a new illustration. Two strangers sat across from one another inside a subway car. One held a weathered sketchbook. The other looked quietly out the window, unaware that a single ordinary moment was about to change both of their lives forever. Around them, the city continued moving exactly as it had that morning a year ago. Beneath the drawing appeared a single sentence. "The greatest journeys often begin when someone chooses to truly see another person." Elise covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized every careful pencil stroke. "You kept the sketch," she whispered. Declan nodded. "It reminded me every day of the man I wanted to become." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and slowly removed the same worn sketchbook she had once carried everywhere. Time had left gentle marks on the cover, but the pages remained filled with quiet memories. He opened it to the very first portrait, the one that had started everything, before carefully placing a small velvet box beside it. "This sketch taught me something no business success ever could," he said softly. "It taught me that being truly seen is a gift, and being trusted is an even greater one. Elise, you never fell in love with my success. You believed in the person you saw before you knew my name. I promise that from this day forward, the man you drew on that subway will always be the man standing beside you." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that reflected the afternoon sunlight without unnecessary extravagance. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, the noise of Times Square seemed to disappear. Elise looked from the ring to the sketchbook, then into Declan's eyes. This time she saw no hidden identity, no carefully guarded distance, only complete honesty. Smiling through happy tears, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Applause rose from the crowd as strangers who had witnessed the proposal smiled and celebrated with them. Several months later, they exchanged vows in a small garden ceremony surrounded by family, close friends, fellow artists, and students whose lives had been changed through the foundation they now led together. Instead of expensive decorations, the reception displayed hundreds of sketches created by young artists from across New York, reminding everyone that every masterpiece begins with a single line of courage. The original subway portrait remained framed near the entrance, not as a symbol of wealth or fame, but as a reminder that kindness, honesty, and authentic connection can transform ordinary moments into extraordinary lives. And whenever visitors asked how their story began, Elise would simply smile at the old sketchbook resting safely in its glass case and say, "Sometimes the most important person you will ever meet is still a stranger for just one subway stop." If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.